Have you ever felt that everything in life falls on its own? A single moment sets a chain of events into motion. A delay, a wrong turn, a chance encounter. Are these unfolding events mere coincidence, or is there logic behind them?
Today, we are going to learn about logical implication, a basic but very important concept in logic and mathematics. Logical implication describes the relationship between two statements in the form of if P then Q. This statement is written symbolically as P implies Q. Here, P is called the hypothesis and Q is called the conclusion. Besides writing a logical implication using symbol P implies Q, we can also express the same idea using different sentences in English. All of these following statements mean the same thing. For example, if P then Q, this is the most direct and common way to express implication. Next, if P, Q, P is sufficient for Q, Q if P, Q when P, a necessary condition for Q is P, Q unless not P, P implies Q, P only if Q, P is sufficient condition for Q, Q whenever P, Q is necessary for P, Q follows P, P is necessary condition for Q. Although the sentences look different, they all represent the same logical implication, which is P implies Q.
Hey, do you think if I study then I will pass? What if I don't study? Will I fail? Does that automatically make the statement false? I don't think so. I guess we have to figure it out. Let's use a truth table. What is truth table? A truth table is a table that shows all possible truth value of a statement, and it helps us determine whether the statement is true or false. Other than that, in logical implication, we also use truth table and focus on P implies Q, which means if P then Q. So how do we do it? Okay,
And let's look at the statement, which is if I study, then I pass the exam. And let P represent I study and Q represent I pass the exam. Since P and Q can each be either true or false, there are only 4 possible combinations for this. So let's look at our table. So in our table, it will be a column of P, Q, and P implies Q. And then let's look at our first case, which is if P true and Q true. So in the first case, P is true and Q is also true. This means I studied and I passed. So our original statement, which is if I study then I pass, is clearly true because the condition is fulfilled. That's why in our table it will be T, T and T. Okay, next for the case 2, which is if P true and Q is false. Okay, so in this case, P is true, but Q is false. This means I studied, but I still failed. So, the statement if I study, then I pass, which is our original statement, is false because the promise is broken. So, in the table, it will be T, F, and F. As you can see, this is the only situation where a logical implication becomes false because the promise is broken. Okay, next. Case 3, which is if P false and Q is true. This means I didn't study but I still pass. Logically, the implication is true because the condition if I study was never happened. So since the condition is not met, the statement cannot be proven false. So the statement will be true. And it will be false, true and true. Lastly, in the case 4, which is if P false and Q false. In the last one, both P and Q are false, which is it will be I didn't study and I also failed, and this implication is still considered true because the condition didn't occur. So the implication will be considered as true because logical implication only checks what happened when P is true. So if P false and our Q is false, then the statement will be true. By this, we can conclude that a logical implication P implies Q is false only when P is true and Q is false. In all other cases, the implication will be true.
So, in your case, if you study, you will pass. But if you don't study, it's either you will pass or you will fail. I see. Now I get it.
So next, I will explain about form of logical implication. So as we know, the original phrase are using symbolic form P implies Q. For example, the phrase is, if I study, I will get A. So the P is I study and Q is I get A. There are three related forms of implications. But what is the difference between all those? So first, I will explain about converse. The symbolic form is Q implies P, which was the reverse of the original phrase. For example, if I get A, I will study. Okay. For second, I will explain about inverse. The symbolic form is not P implies not Q, which denoted from original phrase. For example, if I not study, I will not get A. And lastly, I will explain about contrapositive. The symbolic form is not Q implies not P, which both reverse and denote from original phrase. For example, if I not get A, then I will not study.
Now, let's learn about true value of implication statement. In logic, after we form a statement using implication, we want to know its final verdict. Is the statement always true, always false, or does it depend on the situation? Well, these three possibilities are called tautology, contradiction, and contingency. Okay, first, the tautology. This is the gold standard of logic. A statement is a tautology if it is always true, no matter what the initial value of Q and Q are. Just like in this table, every row in the truth table is true. So, the implication is true. Therefore, the statement is tautology. Next, we have the contradiction. This is the logic fail. The statement is a contradiction if it's always false. It is like saying the light is on and the light is off at the same time. It is logically never can be true. Just like in the truth table, every row is false. Since the statement is false in every possible case, it is called a contradiction. And finally, there is the contingency. This is the most common one that we see in the daily life. It is a statement that is sometimes true and sometimes false, depending on the situation. Well, if your final column is a mix of true and false, just like in this table, we can say it is a contingency. We can see by using truth table, we can clearly see whether an application form a tautology, contradiction, or contingency. For better understanding, let's take a look at this example. Now, check the final column. Since every row resulted in a true, we can obviously conclude that this statement is a tautology. And that's how we determine the true value of logical implication.
By nature, humans are gifted with power of reasoning, and logic is the study of the use of this power. With correct way, this principle can be brought to surface, formulated precisely, and applied with confidence to problem solving. Logical implication teach us to reason carefully and tell us something is not always true, but what must be true when a condition is met. Whatever the situation we encounter in life, logic is used to reach a conclusion or a final statement. Each problem relies on rules of inference or truth table, and each argument produces a different conclusion and outcome. Other than that, we can also conclude that P implies Q only false when P is true and Q is false. If the truth table is tautology, which means all arguments are true, the argument is valid. But if it's not logically implies.